going to start recording this to make sure that folks can watch it after. But, rather than me read your long bio, which is filled with a ton of great information as well, I would just love it if you could tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you got there.
Sure. And I found out earlier, by the way, that anytime you start recording or meeting, you're supposed to tell everybody in the meeting that you're recording legally, which makes me feel a little bit strange every time I say it. So I appreciate you letting me know. My name is Danielle Trivisonno Hawley. I am the Global Executive Creative Director at Uber. Prior to that, I was in the agency world for 17 years, which makes me sound old, which is a whole other topic that we could probably spend an hour and a half on. I have been a writer since I was a little kid. Can't remember a time where I wasn't trying to tell stories. And I was lucky enough to also be a soccer player. And when I went to college, I had an incredible guidance counselor who also very lucky. I don't know how many people get to experience that. And I was in her office one day and I sort of said, I don't know what I want to do, but I know that I write. And she said, do you want to be an English major? And I said, no. And a couple of weeks later, I read the Nike women's ad, If You Let Me Play by Janet Champ. And I looked at it and said, I know two things about myself. I'm a soccer player and I write, and I want to know who did this. How do I get to do this? And brought it to that guidance counselor. And she said, oh, you want to be in advertising. And that was it. I was hook, line, and sinker, plugged into the communications program at SMU, played soccer, and was in the ad program for the next 4 years. And at that time in Dallas, which is also another story for another time, there were great agencies at that time in Dallas. And DDB had Midway Games. And they also had a character whom some of you may remember from the old days named Jim Ferguson. And he was a legendary copywriter. And all of Jim's disciples, if you will, in Dallas came and taught our classes. So at SMU, I had creative directors in the advertising world coming in, teaching us how to write briefs, teaching us how to interpret briefs, teaching us basically what their days were like, and got a really early good glimpse into what would be the rest of my life, to be honest. But then, of course, you don't graduate with a portfolio because you have to take Common Core and psychology and all the other classes that you need to take in college. And so I went to the Creative Circus, which is a portfolio school in Atlanta. After that, I got a job in Denver with a female art director partner who I had met at the Creative Circus, and at that time was incredibly rare. And the two of us went to an all-male creative department and worked on the women's jean brand, which I'm sure many of you have similar stories about being the girls working on the girl work. And we were there for about 9 months, and our beloved creative director decided to move on, and we put our book out into the world to sort of say, oh, well, we should go somewhere else. We really just were here to work for him. And we got a job in 2 weeks. So we packed up the car and moved to Seattle. And we began working at an agency called Creature. And Creature was a very different kind of an agency. At that time, we would have called them Guerrilla. Remember when we were calling out of home and alternative media Guerrilla? And Creature really taught me about media agnostic ideas, ideas that were about buying media space inside someone's mind and then applying channels that either existed or didn't exist yet to those ideas. It was the toughest 5 years of my life. I worked 85-hour weeks in a very misogynistic environment. The only really good thing was that I honed my craft, was client facing because we were such a small shop, and I met my husband, or my soon to be husband, and then got a job at the nascent Zaz, which became Possible, and met Amy, and Possible became Wonderman Thompson. So I went from being an associate creative director at Zaz to being the chief creative officer of North America for Possible, and then the executive creative director for the Seattle office of Wonderman Thompson, and then decided that I was tired of convincing clients to be brave. And I had all these amazing clients, Xbox, T-Mobile, AT&T at one time, Tommy Hilfiger, who did do end up doing brave work, but it was just a constant struggle of, this is what you should be doing with your brand. This is how to break through with the audience that you need to break through with. And I got tired of it. So I thought about making the switch over to brand side, because I figured that the industry needed more brave clients. They didn't need more brave creative directors, but they needed more brave clients. And I jumped in with my boss, Thomas Renice, who's the CMO at Uber, and his charter to me and my team is to go make marketing history. And that's what we're doing. I had a couple kids along the way too.
Cute ones. That's so, yeah. I mean, it's been such an interesting, like, path to hear and see like your journey, and I've heard your story in the past for myself, but I am kind of curious, and I was looking through to see if I had this question in there later, but I was curious about the fact that you made that jump from agency, because you were like hardcore agency for so long, to then brand side. What has been, I mean, I think you stepped into, it sounds like, into a brand for the right reasons, and
Yeah.
with the right camaraderie. But what have been some of the unique challenges and differences that you've noticed between your past agency life and now working brand side?
Well, I've learned how dumb agencies are. No, really. It's kind of amazing how you think that you understand clients and you think that you understand their business.
Mhm.
And really, at the very least, I had no idea. And I was pretty close with a lot of very senior clients at that point in my career, and on the agency side. It is far more fast-paced than you could ever imagine. Advertising on the agency side goes and sort of fits and starts. And the intensity of how, say, a pitch can go in the agency world, the intensity before a launch on the brand side is hard, but you don't ever get to that really like, holy crap, if we don't win this business, people are going to get laid off. Like, there's none of that. It's intense, but I keep saying there's less anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
There's still stress, but there's less anxiety. And that's the biggest thing, is that the pace does not ebb and flow. It's constant. It's always at a fast jog.
Mm-hmm.
But the highs and lows aren't quite as high and low as the agency side.
That makes sense. That makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like, when you are living and breathing a brand, it's different than when you are kind of sitting from the outside and serving a number of masters. On an agency side, it's a difficult place to be. I can understand that for sure. We did have one quick question come through too that's very timely. Jess was asking, at the time, did you know that wanting your clients to be brave was the fatigue at the time, or does that feel like more hindsight bringing clarity?
It's a complicated ball of wax, as everyone's careers moves are. It wasn't just that, but certainly I was very aware of that. I was aware of when an agency goes through mergers, and as many mergers as WPP is putting many of the agencies through, you end up with a lot of split leadership. And I think this is one of the biggest things I've learned on the brand side, is that if an agency doesn't know who they are, clients don't even want to go near that. Yeah. If you aren't 100% convicted in what you do, why you do it, what your values are, and if that looks splintered at all in a room, a pitch room, a meeting room, it shows. There is no hiding it. And if you have smart enough clients, they'll see right through that. We were at the agency at Wunderman Thompson, we were really serving many, many masters. And then all of a sudden, the leaders who understood why the work for Xbox was mediocre, we all of a sudden had a bunch of leaders going, why isn't the work better on Xbox?
Right.
And then you're trying to say, well, the client won't do brave work. And then it looks like you're making excuses, and which you are, but still, getting behind the curtain of what the clients, what their own internal struggles are and what's getting in the way of them being brave is a very hard thing to relay to a bunch of leaders who may or may not be even in your office, may or may not even know your team, may or may not have even met the client, and are just going, it's Xbox, go do cool work.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do it anymore.
Mhm. No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I'll go to the next question then on speaking about the brand side since we got there, and we'll go back up in a minute here to the creative leadership and
Yeah.
philosophy of clients back to agency side. Knowing kind of Uber's past, how have things been changing from the inside and what gives you hope about the future of Uber? And I don't know if you want to give extra context to folks, but I feel like you might be living under a rock if you're not aware of some of the things that have happened with Uber in the past, but I don't want to assume anything.
Yeah, I said no 4 times when the recruiter reached out to me.
Yeah.
It was not a brand I wanted to get in bed with. And I think when you decide that there's an option of you going client side, you really want to sink your teeth into a brand that you love or a brand that you feel like you can add value to. And here's what's going on at Uber. As most of you know, it was growth at all costs. And we were very much a rebel, and that idea of disruption, I think, in a lot of ways, Uber sort of invented. We weren't really saying, how can we disrupt a market? How can we disrupt an industry until Uber came along, which is a very unique attribute to have in your history and your corporate culture. But if it gets unwieldy, as it did, you end up scorching earth and doing things that were illegal, and it went too far. It was growth at all costs, ask for forgiveness later, and it came back to bite the brand really, really hard. And then there was a massive scandal of sexual harassment and all of the bad behavior that we all are probably too familiar with in this industry, unfortunately. And they ousted Travis. So we have a brand new CEO who, well, he's not brand new anymore. He's about 2.5 years in, but those of you who don't know Dara Khosrowshahi, he's a pretty formidable leader. As a Seattleite, I've known him for years because I've watched what he's done with Expedia. And he is responsible. He is brave, but he is also very responsible. And he turned the corner from growth at all costs to profit. And so there has been a massive shift in what we're all calling the Dara chapters, where that is being wrangled back in. And we are, instead of being rebels, we are being creators. And we are working with cities, and we are working with policy, and we are working with all of the things that we believe the gig economy can and should be. And it's not an easy page turn. But I think what shocked me the most was that when I met the people inside Uber, what you're dealing with is people who really want to change the world, and they want to change the world for the better. And they're all fighting against sort of this group of people who poisoned the well. And they're either new to the brand or new to the mission and are really passionate about it, or have always waited for this moment, have been around a long time and are just waiting for the moment where we can do the right thing. And what I think is fascinating is when you're a movement company and everyone knows you for that, and quite frankly, you're the best at that. And no one can move. The world can't move. The world can't go anywhere. Whether that be because of a global pandemic, whether that be because women don't feel safe in cars after a certain hour of the day, or drivers don't feel safe driving cars after a certain hour of the day, or you're experiencing racial injustice and you don't feel safe to move about the world, not just move about in cars. We have a very strong voice in that conversation, and we're starting to come out. And I think the internal view and the internal values of Uber are just starting to come out to the external. And that's incredibly exciting. And that's why I thought, you know what, I know how to do this. And I want to do this, and I want to help. And these are great people that I feel like I can change the world with.
That's awesome. That sounds so exciting. Yeah, I'm thrilled to see all of the moves that they've been making. I think at some point too, right before I might have left Possible, I thought we were working through and pitching stuff for, like, they were doing some kind of women's initiative, and they had hired a new CMO who was a woman, and they were really trying hard to dig in and admit and fix the mistakes. And I think that's always really key when you're a brand. Like, nobody's ever perfect. And some things, obviously it's hard for people to forgive and move on and move past, but at the same time, I think acknowledging and addressing those things openly, honestly, and quickly is like the best way. And I do think that Uber managed to do that in a lot of ways very well. And since we're still on the topic of Uber, I'm going to continue on that. And then we'll go back to giving some agency side advice for those of
Yeah,
you who are still
yeah,
sitting
yeah.
with clients that you're trying to push to be brave and do good in the world. But go ahead and maybe give us a little bit more about what Uber is doing to mobilize voters with Get Out the Vote.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine, and I won't pull any punches, that that anytime your values butt up at an internal at a brand on the brand side, anytime your values butt up against an election, you get tested. You get
Yeah.
you get tested pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
And the line that you may have crossed during the race riots all of a sudden becomes scary, right? Because you're responsible for people's jobs. You're responsible for so much, and that weight can certainly splinter. But I am proud that we are offering discounted rides to the polls. We have an in-app poll finding feature, which is really great. The second that you get in an Uber, you can search the closest poll and get there right away. We're partnering with Pizza to the Polls, so we're going to feed people while they're waiting in line, because certainly long lines are a very big issue with voter turnout. And then we're turning a lot of our green light hubs, which are our stations for drivers, into polling places in and of themselves. We also put out a very big initiative to get people to register to vote. And through our app, through our communications, we're proud that we got 75,000 voter registrations via the initiative, which is incredibly powerful, I think. And the team that did that work is just like walking around with their chest puffed up. They're so excited that they actually got people to register. And voter suppression is a real thing. And our role in that conversation is really to make sure that anybody that needs a ride to the polling stations for whatever reason should get one. So
that's amazing. Yeah, that's exactly what got my attention. I was flipping through Adweek or something like that maybe, and I saw that you guys were working on this, and I was like, oh, Danielle's been there for long enough now. I feel like we can just start to dig in and talk about what you're doing there and everything. So that was so awesome, and I think that's so great. And I agree, the challenge of how to address things and address situations in a way that feels fair when it's politically concerned is a challenge. So I think it makes me wonder and think, like, even from an agency side, would you have ever been able to pull that off? Or do you feel like that had to be an inside job?
I think it had to be an inside job. We work with an agency in Australia who's expanding into the United States, called Special Group. And that's the agency that we do all of our Uber Eats work with. Some of you might have seen the Tonight I'll Be Eating commercials that are pretty much all over the place right now. But we're working on an initiative for Uber Eats to play a role on election night, and that's an interesting conversation, right? But we went to them and said, okay, let's see what we can do for voter. Right. We're not experiencing, widen an anomaly and Special Group and everyone coming to us going, this is what you should do during election.
Sure.
And I think it's just probably that they've learned the hard way that that's like pushing a boulder up the hill if you don't have clients on your side.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. Amanda was asking, is this available in all cities or certain cities?
I don't know. The voter registration is certainly global, or all over the country, but I meant global, like in the global terms, not global around the world. And then the Pizza to the Polls, I believe, is in certain cities where the partnership is where actual Pizza to the Polls exists. So that's less about us and more about our restaurant partners. But Shake Shack and Milk Bar and the others have quite a lot of locations. So that's great. The feature in app is available everywhere. But it just really depends on the local on the ground stuff that limits our availability to help.
That's awesome. That's great. I'm interested to see sort of how it turns out and how people if they use those discounted rides to get to the polls. And what's cool is it sounds like you guys probably be able to track that, right?
We can, yes. Data is a very interesting thing. You would think that we had an abundance of it, but no one knows how to use it. Surprise, surprise. But I think the thing that's the hardest is that what we're also still seeing is people are scared to get in Ubers. And there's a whole safety element in the ride element. So even if you can't walk to your polling station because it's too far, you can't take a bike, or you have accessibility issues, there is still the barrier to overcome that when you get in that Uber, you'll be safe.
Yeah.
So it's underpinned by our door-to-door safety efforts, but that fear is real.
Yeah. Okay, let me see if I had any other questions that were Uber centric.
Billy's reminding me of something too.
Oh, okay.
The trucks will be stopping in the following cities: Phoenix, Arizona, Los Angeles, Washington, Miami, Tampa, Gainesville, Atlanta, Louisville, Detroit, Ann Arbor, Minneapolis, Charlotte, Raleigh, Greensboro, Las Vegas, Reno, New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Charleston, Nashville, Houston, Austin, and Milwaukee.
Awesome. Thank you, Belly. Yeah, we've got a few folks from those cities specifically. So yeah, I'm sure folks will be checking it out for sure. That's awesome. It's a good idea. All right. So does anybody else have any questions specifically about Uber's initiatives, efforts, anything like that? Otherwise, I'm going to move into more kind of backing it out to our agency days, because I know a lot of folks that are listening are still in service of clients as opposed to being on the brand side.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think of which order would be best. I'll back it up to this, what was going to be the second question.
Yeah.
You know, I've always, you're one of those like few creative leaders that I felt like always provided a lot of really great transparency and support with like enough push. And I've also heard like your philosophy on managing teams and managing clients, and I've always found it all very insightful and useful. So I wanted to have you share that with the rest of the group. What's your philosophy and take on creative leadership with your team and your clients?
With the team, you know, I think I've learned both from the good creative directors that I've had and the not so great creative directors I have. And I think that at the end of the day, you have to be incredibly hard on the work. The standard for the work has to be very high, and you have to make sure that the team understands where that bar is and what your expectations are. There's nothing worse than working for somebody where you have absolutely no idea what bar or expectation you're trying to reach or hit. And I think Amy can attest that I'm very hard on the work, but it doesn't mean you need to be very hard on the people. And especially in a creative industry, that can be hard because people have a very hard time removing their personal identity from the work that they're putting forward. And I have an enormous amount of respect for that because I used to do that. And I know how it felt when you got feedback that felt like it was a personal attack versus feedback about the work that you were presenting. So I try to make a really, really hard line in the distinction of that. Sometimes in the middle of a feedback session, I will always say, this isn't about you, this is about the work. And most of the time, the work isn't great because the brief wasn't great. And so you have to go back and interrogate the brief. And it's definitely a garbage in, garbage out scenario. And one of the mistakes that I see a lot of creative teams make is that they run to the work as fast as they can. Oh, we've got a deadline. Oh, we've got to, instead of sitting with the strategy team or the planning team and really cracking open the brief itself. So, I mean, I think as far as leadership with the team, I try to be as empathetic as possible, but also as tough as possible as the standards can go. I expect everybody to know their shit.
Yep.
And that can be tough for people. But I also will never leave you on an island. And so if you're struggling or you have the right attitude or you are passionate about something, I'll always offer help. And it can feel a little bit polarizing one way or the other. And that's a challenge that I have to work on. I have to remind myself that that when I'm being hard on the work, that I have to remember how people are receiving that. But I don't think that it does anybody a service to be anything less than incredibly honest.
Agree. Clear as kind, as Brianna.
Clear as kind, as Brene would say.
Yeah.
As far as clients go, I think that the biggest thing we have to remember is that we should be, as the agency, the best part of that client's day. And now more than ever, I realize the stuff that goes on behind the closed doors of a brand and how that shit funnel can just be quite overwhelming. And you're in meetings with product teams, you're in meetings with leaders, you're in meetings with people that don't understand creativity. And that's the burden of a creative leader inside a brand organization. But so when you when you are the agency and you show up to deliver work, be the best part of that client's day. And whether that be incredibly empathetic of, do you even want to see work right now? It looks like you've had a really tough day. Or is this the thing that's going to inspire you and lift you up? I think just that recognition and that acknowledgement of what's happening on the client side, I think is more important than the work. And it's hard for me to talk to agency folks without now having the experience of being on the other side influencing my leadership style. But I would say from a creative direction perspective, don't expect the client to know what they want. You have to have a strong point of view. And I always knew that I was in trouble when I walked in those client meetings and I wasn't sure what my point of view was. Mm-hmm. So it is more important than the work itself. The work can ebb and flow. There's always, ideas are the infinite resource. But if you don't have a point of view about what the client should be doing to solve the problem that they've brought to you, you're dead in the water.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, you're not being a good partner. It's what they want you there for.
Exactly right.
It's not for pleasing, it's for partnering. It's so funny because I had a former Gillette client reach out recently. He's launching his own brand. He wanted to call me to just talk through the creative and the work that they're doing. He's like, you are my demographic and I know you'll tell me exactly what you think. And I was like, I take that as a compliment. Thank you. So it definitely pays off. It pays off.
Yeah. And I think that was the other thing that I learned working on the Tommy Hilfiger adaptive work. Mm-hmm. Was that was the other thing, is that the more that you can encourage your clients that the answer isn't around that conference room table, and that the answer really lies with the people that you think you know, mm-hmm. that you have no idea about. I think the better off the work will be, and the more invested the client will be, because you'll have taken them on along the journey.
Yeah, no, I agree for sure. So on that note, several of the past and present initiatives that you've worked on have involved impacting the greater good. Mm-hmm. What were you part of selling those ideas in? Like, you can expound upon the Tommy Hilfiger example. If so, what were some strategies that you used to get brands on board? I think you kind of started to tiptoe into it, so it's a good time to get into that question.
Yeah, Tommy was really interesting, right? Because they came to us knowing that they wanted to create this product. So certainly the idea for the product itself or the line of clothing wasn't ours, but what was ours was everything that followed. So when they approached the agency, they sort of said, we represent the fashion industry. And if we step a toe into this, whole other realm, how are we going to be taken seriously? How is anybody going to believe that this isn't some sort of a PR stunt or this is charity? They were serious about an untapped audience. The people living with disabilities represent an audience size the size of China. And there is massive buying power that brands are not taking advantage of. And I think if there's anything that I learned from people living with disabilities and that whole community, was they want to be marketed to. They want people to create products for them. They want you to sell them. They want you to treat them like everyone else. Mm-hmm. And yet they're largely being ignored and they have a lot of money to spend. Mm-hmm. So that, I think that was the first sort of Band-Aid rip, was, this is not charity. This is about selling clothes to an audience that's underrepresented. And that was hard for Tommy, because we really had to say, this will have impact on your Halo brand, but you have to treat this like a regular line of clothing. You cannot discount it. You cannot offer it different ways. You have to just sell it like you're selling clothes to, someone who is an able-bodied person. And that whole selling process was fascinating. Because once we unlocked the idea that this community wants nothing but independence, you have to interrogate the entire customer journey. So if you make the clothes, then you have to make it accessible to buy the clothes. Was the website accessible? Did we have voice activation on Alexa? Then we built an Alexa skill to make sure that you could shop if you were someone living with a disability. Then we had to say, what are we doing with the marketing itself? We obviously had a cast of characters who were some of the most amazing people that I've ever met, but they also weren't actors.
Yeah.
And so then we had to get a sense of, well, what's the crew like?
Mm-hmm.
How do we make sure that this is an accessible environment? Not just from, are there lifts for the stage, but just from are we creating an environment for where these non-actors can feel comfortable to share their stories? Yeah. And I will never forget when Nicole McDonough, who Amy knows well, ran up to my desk and was like, I found our director. And she put in front of me a pitch from a young man named James who was blind. And then I'm thinking, like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to sell a blind director to Tommy Hilfiger? Because I knew it was the right thing to do. Yeah. I knew that James could do what a director's job was on set, which was to get the best performance out of the talent, because he had an incredibly empathetic way of capturing what we could never even, what none of us could see, he could see infinitely, just by hearing the intonation of their voices or feeling the vibe of the set or understanding when somebody's voice was shaking in nerves. And that was a profound experience. But to go to Tommy Hilfiger and say, you can have Janusz Kaminski, who's an Academy Award-winning director, or James, who's 22 and never directed a film. That was a very difficult moment. And we were very lucky that with some pushing and some hand-holding, that we were able to convince the client that that was the right thing to do.
That's amazing.
And then closed captioning and making sure that the ad itself was able to be viewed by the people that needed to see it and hear it, as it were. And it was a whole transformation. I had to literally unlearn everything that I thought I knew about this business.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? That's so cool. I love when I get to work on projects like that just teach me more perspective than what I could have ever experienced outside of that. I felt fortunate. I had a P&G shoot that was like that, where it was non-talent, family with disabilities, interracial families, and just really trying to make it an accommodating space for non-talent, and how to make sure that the day went well. I think that's so cool. I never got to hear that story. That's so awesome. And Billy also was so kind as to share the Vimeo link to the ad itself. And just in case you didn't read, Danielle, some folks were saying, I really loved the Tommy ad. Another, my sister is in a wheelchair and got very excited when she saw the Target ads about wheelchair Halloween costumes. And then Amanda said that she's looking at the Tommy ads now. Awesome work. Very different for Tommy. Major kudos.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I had to learn as a creative was, like, it was the first thing I'd ever done that I wanted everyone to copy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted everybody to steal the idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's what this is really all about. So I was Target is doing a great job. Xbox is doing a great job with the adaptive controller. There's a lot of brands that are getting it right.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, that's awesome. That's so great. So the next question, it was, I think we already know the answer, but do you believe that brands ought to take a part in leaving or making the world a better place?
Certainly. But they have to do it with the right level of authenticity. I think, Gillette is actually a great example, Amy, of the best a man can get is so niche. I mean, we all know that tagline because we're in the business, but it was their voice in the conversation around toxic masculinity was a leap, right? Why is my razor talking to me about this?
Right.
And the connection back was that they had played a part in presenting male masculinity in a negative way with a tagline that was the best a man can get, and they wanted to mea culpa and right that wrong. Yeah. But there was a lot of people who didn't get that connection. Yeah. And just said, I don't want my razor telling me how to raise my children or live my life or be in the world. And so I think it's a real it really matters, the foundation and the core values of your brand and how you show up to say that you're going to help change the world. There's nothing worse than seeing a brand in a conversation they don't belong in.
Yes. 100%. I think there's a great, you should check her out. You would love her stuff. Katie Martell, she's been an MC for us, a speaker for us. She's working through a documentary right now called Pandermonium, talking a lot about how brands pander to certain movements and things like that, and has a very clear point of view on how brands can go about really authentically approaching these topics and conversations and looking into their values and their abilities to say that this is how we could work to help. Because there is that fine line, and anymore, especially nowadays, if you don't do it well and you don't do it right from a place of truth, people will call you out on it.
Right. It's right. And I
So,
think it's really scary. I mean, I will share that, we recently came out and said that we were an anti-racist company. During the Black Lives Matters movement, we put a bunch of out of home boards along the routes of the marches, basically encouraging people to if you are not anti-racist, you need to not be on our platform. And we were so excited about it internally. Every employee was behind it. We had D&I experts look at it externally. We had D&I experts look at it internally. We collaborated with Black at Uber. We did everything that you could possibly imagine to make sure that we were so careful about every word. And we really felt it was the right thing to do. Tons of negative feedback. Didn't land in the way that we expected it to land at all. And I'm proud of our organization for taking that stand. Dara himself said that if we were going to swing, we would swing again. But I think it's better than doing nothing. But I also have a lot of empathy for the organizations that are trying to do the right thing and step in it somehow, some way.
Agree. We had a good talk about that too. We had an allyship roundtable that really talked about that. And I think there's obviously people who are open-minded and understanding that, an effort is an effort. And it's like, if you don't stand for anything, then you stand for nothing. And they would rather see people try to take a stand for something. And I think it's important, as individuals and as brands, as we work towards that, journey and allyship of really like, there's not any getting it right. It's just stopping doing it and like saying, well, we made a mistake, so we're never going to do it again. We're not going to do anything D&I really. That's dumb. Like you have to keep pressing in. You have to make those mistakes and learn. And that's not always so easy. We had another comment come in from Jess saying that she agreed with, I think something you were saying earlier this year, brands taking a stand has been a refreshing phenomenon, but you're right, Danielle, authenticity to the brand and their audience is key.
Yep, that's right.
100%. So how could we as stewards of brands and marketers or influencers, whatever position role we might be in, encourage our brands, our clients to leverage their power and their voice for the greater good?
I think that if you don't see a brand's values written on their walls, in their employee handbooks, that's where you start. And I actually was fascinated. Another thing that I was really impressed with when I was interviewing at Uber was Dara had taken Travis's core set of values and rewritten them. And what was so amazing about it was an evolution. And he made it very clear to the staff that it wasn't going to be revolution, but it was going to be an evolution into the right place for something like hustle. Hustle gone bad is rebellion. Hustle turned great is creators. And there was a lot of unlocks into the way that the brand wanted to behave and perhaps where we were getting it wrong. And so if you don't see that, I would say push on it hard. And then, there is that Venn diagram, if you will, if we want to play armchair strategists, or some of you may be strategists, but, your brand's mission should be the intersection of what you are uniquely capable of offering the world and what the world desperately needs. And if there is nothing in that intersection, you don't have the right to speak up in that conversation. So I think even in just doing your own mental math of getting clear about what that Venn diagram looks like will get you an ability to articulate when you do think that the brand should step up and have a voice, or whether you're not encouraging the brand to play a part in something that may be happening in culture.
That's great. That's good advice. All right, I had one more question, and then we can open it up. And ladies, you can feel free to unmute if you want to unmute and ask the questions. If you want to type them in because you're multitasking or you're just feeling shy, you can do that too. But the last question that had come through gotta scroll back, was what are you most excited about as 2020 comes to a close, professionally and or personally?
Oh, I went to the pediatrician with my son the other day who had his 9-year appointment, and I live in Seattle for those of you who don't know, but she looked at me and she was like, "What are your winter COVID strategies?"
Mm.
Like, oh crap. Because those of you who've ever been to Seattle, it's about to get really dark. It's about to get really rainy, and it's going to get cold too. And the schools are so great about just sort of like ushering your children outside for recess and getting them enough exercise. But I think I'm just looking forward to turning the page on what has been such a tough year. But I also am being realistic about, I don't think that page turning is coming for a while. And I was reading this article the other day about resilience, and I believe in the power of resilience, and I try to be as resilient as possible. I try to instill it into my kids. I try to instill it into my teams. But I'm also kind of pissed off that we even need to be resilient. And I think so often we forget about that. We forget about taking time to acknowledge that resilience usually means that there's something wrong going on, and something wrong has been going on for quite a while. So I'm hoping for 2022 that we can all kind of keep the faith and recognize resilience when we need to, but also take care of ourselves and take care of each other, more importantly. I also feel like this whole experience has ripped down some of the barriers. I think Amy can attest, I'm a very like sharp elbow, like I want to get in there and I'm going to fight and I'm going to make sure that I'm making space for great work. But for some reason maybe I just matured overnight. I don't know, but I really do think that it's experience we've gone through in the last 8 months where I stopped myself from immediately pushing back and asking myself, why is this person snapping at me? They're clearly under pressure. They're clearly doing that because they feel A, anxious, or B, stressed, or something is going on in their life. And rather than approaching it with what I would normally do would be bow up and like get ready for the fight, I'm trying to say, I need to show empathy, and that person needs my support. And I'm hoping that becomes a bit contagious. That's what I'm hoping for in 2020, personally, and quite frankly, professionally too.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. It has been a challenging year, and it always brings out so much in other people. And especially when we're dealing with everything in this kind of a platform virtually. I took a few days off after our last virtual summit and realized 4 days was the longest I had gone without being on Zoom since March. And, just trying to kind of facilitate, build, establish, maintain relationships, and really be cognitive and empathetic with people from a distance. It's tiring, but it's also fascinating. And I'm amazed at how well some folks are able to do it despite all of the distance. So I think it's been a very learning year. I agree with you. I think it's matured us all in ways that we probably wouldn't have expected, for better or for worse. That's so awesome. Well, we didn't have any other questions coming in, but we'll hang for a minute in case we did, because I feel like there was something else I wanted to ask you or say other than thank you.
Of course, of course.
It's good to get to catch up and hear everything that you're doing and all the amazing things going on at Uber. I'm excited to see all that comes out of it for the next year, and hopefully we can have you back again sometime, or any of you guys at Uber, because again, I think what all you guys are doing there is just phenomenal. So it's always good to hear.
Yeah, hopefully we'll continue to do. I've made more work in 5 months than I have in 5 years, and it really feels like we're turning the corner. So I'm excited about where we can take the brand. I think the other thing is, just I think this is an example of it. You meet people along the way that you're like, I'm going to always show up for that person. I'm going to always show up for Amy. Amy's always going to show up for me. And that's what this business is really about, is just who are the people you want to show up for, and who do you want to show up for you when the chips are down? Because there will always be another merger. There will always be another leader that comes in. There will always be a new client. There will always be one business and lost business. And at the end of the day, that's what I want to say that I got out of it, was a group of people who I know would have had my back.
Agreed, 100%. Amanda was asking if you're open to connecting with folks on LinkedIn.
Sure, of course.
Awesome. Well, this was great. Thank you so much. And no other questions? You don't have a question today? She just put food in her mouth and she's like, Amy, don't ask me to ask a question. She asks the best questions.
I have a
Awesome.
question for you guys, if you're willing.
Yeah, that's great.
What do you think is the thing that that we all as women need to remember as we go into some of the situations that we have that are pretty daunting? I'm
Mhm.
sure you guys have had this this conversation a million times. So I'm curious as to what advice you have for me, and what I can pass on to some of the women leaders at Uber.
Frankly, remembering that summary that you just ran through, these are, understand who you want to show up for and make those relationships and make them real.
Mhm.
I think that's truly the thing that has helped me in the best stead in my career.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I would add actually being the first to say something at the table, even if you don't have the time to fully think about what it is that you want to say. I think often women will listen first and speak later, or maybe if you're more of an introvert, time passes and you haven't had a chance to actually say your piece. So I would say always be the first to say something, especially if you're second guessing what's being said in the conversation.
Love it.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds crazy, but I would add to that, and it's weird and hard for me to say as a collaborator, people pleaser is me first. Me first. Like, I have to take care of me first. Like, I have to stay healthy. I have to stay sane. I have to take care of myself. I don't think I've done a good job of that in the past. And I feel like this year has absolutely forced me to, before job and sometimes even before my kids, which is really, really hard, say me first. So this year has definitely forced me to force my hand in doing more of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I was having a conversation with someone on my team earlier where he was like, how are you so honest? And I just said, because when I'm not, it eats me up inside, and no job is worth that.
Nope.
And perhaps that's a bit privileged of me to say, that that I have a bit of financial security, and then I can risk, what backlash might come at me for that honesty. But I now know what I'm willing to endure and what I'm not.
Yeah, that's great. I would agree with that too. That was awesome. What a great question.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate you having me, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing and the way that you're showing up for each other. So if I can ever do anything or help, please let me know. And I'm certainly going to be watching along and following along, and making sure that I can draft off some of the awesomeness that you guys are in the act of doing all the time.
Yeah, please do. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Danielle. It's so good to see you. Say hi to the
Thank you
family for me.
guys. I will. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.